You walk into a room and someone's trying way too hard. Loud voice, big gestures. Look at me, energy radiating off them like heat. And what happens? You look away. Now someone else enters. Quiet, centered, not performing. And suddenly, everyone's eyes drift toward them without even knowing why. What is that? Why does the person screaming for attention repel us, while the person who doesn't seem to need it pulls us in like gravity? Why are the most magnetic people the ones who aren't chasing anything at all? We're told confidence is attractive. Be yourself. Stand out. But nobody mentions the paradox hiding underneath those words. The moment you need attention, the moment you're hunting for validation like your life depends on it, you become the opposite of magnetic. You become repellent. And the people who don't need your approval, who don't need anyone's approval, those are the ones we can't stop thinking about. This isn't about playing games. This is about documented psychology, real research, numbers, patterns that show up again and again across cultures and contexts. Let's dig into what the science actually says about why people who don't chase attention end up being the most attractive humans in any room. If you value documented behavioral psychology and attraction research like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the European Journal of Social Psychology, published in September 2024, examining other focused versus self-focused motivational orientations and their effects on prosocial behavior, and the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology from 2018 by researchers Sky, Ju, Zhu, and Rule at the University of Toronto, developing the general charisma inventory that identified influence and affability as the two core dimensions of charisma in everyday life, not just leadership contexts. Now back to the information. Start with attention seeking itself. What is it? The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition text revision, the DSM-5-TR published in 2022, defines attention-seeking as engaging in behavior designed to attract notice and to make oneself the focus of others. Attention and admiration. Sounds harmless, but here's the problem. Research published in the Athens Journal of Social Sciences in 2017 found that when people engage in attention-seeking behavior, they're externalizing their personality rather than acting from internal self-motivation. Translation? They're performing, not being, and humans can smell performance from a mile away. Our brains evolved to detect authenticity because authenticity signals trustworthiness. Someone performing for attention is showing you they need something from you. And that need creates a power imbalance before a single word is spoken. A 2019 study on adolescents with narcissistic tendencies published in peer-reviewed psychology journals found that social media use driven by attention-seeking motives mediated the link between narcissism and problematic behavior. The adolescents sought acceptance, validation, and attention through their posts. When they experienced social rejection or threats to their self-image, their attention-seeking behavior increased. They weren't confident. They were compensating. And compensation always reads as weakness, because it is weakness. It's trying to fill a hole that can't be filled from the outside. Now flip it. What happens when someone doesn't need your attention? A study from Current Directions in Psychological Science examined people who were humble rather than self-focused. Humility, the research found, is linked to open-mindedness, lower aggression, and less judgmental behavior. Humble people, the kind who don't need to be the center of attention, were rated as more attractive in dating profiles. A 2014 study published in Psychology Today involved speed dating experiments where participants rated potential partners. Those described as highly humble in the 87th percentile received better ratings than those marked as not humble in the 24th percentile. Both men and women favored the humble profiles. Participants said they'd give the humble person their phone number and make a date. The not humble? Passed over. Why? Because humility signals secure attachment. Attachment theory, developed by Bowlby and Ainsworth in the 1950s, shows about 56% of adults have secure attachment styles. They don't experience anxiety when someone needs space. They trust and are trusted. They accept and give love without conflict. About 19% have anxious attachment styles. These people fear abandonment, become needy, cling. Their needs weren't met consistently in childhood, so they chase harder, need more, prove they're worthy by working constantly. That strategy fails because neediness is the ultimate attraction killer. Scarcity psychology. A study in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology placed identical cookies in 2 jars. One had 10 cookies, the other had 2. Participants rated the jar with 2 as more valuable, even though the cookies were identical. Scarcity creates perceived value. When you're scarce with attention, time, validation, you become more valuable. Not because you're playing games, because you have a life that doesn't revolve around whether someone likes you. Playing hard to get only works under specific conditions. A 2014 speed dating study by Dai, Dongho, and Jia, published in academic journals, found that playing hard to get only increased desire when someone was already interested. Participants who had chosen their speed date found the hard-to-get person more desirable. But participants randomly paired with someone found that person more desirable when they were easy to get instead. Translation: scarcity magnifies existing interest. It doesn't create interest from nothing. And authentic scarcity, the kind that comes from actually being busy with your own pursuits, works better than manufactured scarcity because people can tell the difference. Carl Rogers, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, said the curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. People with genuine charisma share this trait. They're authentic through and through. They don't fake it. Research from the University of Nottingham, published in psychology journals, found that authenticity is linked to higher self-esteem and well-being, making it attractive on multiple levels. When you're genuine, you give others permission to do the same. You create a space of mutual acceptance. Authenticity isn't about revealing every flaw. It's about being honest with yourself and others about who you are. It means showing up without masks and pretenses. And that depth of realness resonates with people far more than superficial charm. Now, let's talk about what actually makes people magnetic. The General Charisma Inventory, developed by researchers at the University of Toronto in 2018, identified two dimensions: influence and affability. Influence is the ability to lead others and have presence. Affability is the ability to make others feel comfortable and at ease. People with charismatic influence were seen as more competent social partners. People with charismatic affability appeared more warm and caring. And here's the critical finding. Charismatic people don't dominate conversations trying to impress. They listen, really listen, not waiting for their turn to speak, genuinely interested in what you have to say. This is active listening. And research published in psychology journals shows that active listening boosts perceived likability and social influence. When someone makes you feel like the most important person in the room, you remember them, and they're not doing it to manipulate you. They're doing it because they actually find you interesting. That's the difference. Brené Brown, research professor at the University of Houston, spent years studying vulnerability. She found that vulnerability is not winning or losing. It's having the courage to show up and be seen when we have no control over the outcome. Charismatic people embody this courage. They're open about failures, fears, and struggles. This openness doesn't make them weak. It makes them human and relatable. It allows others to connect with them on a deeper, more meaningful level. People who chase attention avoid vulnerability like poison because vulnerability means admitting you're not perfect. But people who don't need attention, they're comfortable with imperfection. They know everyone struggles, so they don't pretend otherwise. And that honesty is magnetic because it's rare. Research on likability, published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, found that only 13% of variance in peer ratings comes from stable characteristics of targets. 70% comes from relationship variance, or residual variance. What does that mean? Whether someone likes you depends far more on the specific relationship between you two than on any general likability trait. But there's a pattern. People with other-oriented traits, traits aimed at maintaining or creating friendships, were more liked. The European Journal of Social Psychology study from 2024 found that other-focused orientations had consistently larger effects on pro-social outcomes than self-focused orientations. When you focus on others, when you're genuinely interested in their lives and experiences, they like you more. Simple as that. Self-focused attention has the opposite effect. A 2010 study published in Behavior Research and Therapy examined social anxiety and self-focused attention. The hypothesis was that heightened self-focused attention leads to poor social performance. But the study found something surprising. Self-focused attention alone didn't predict social rejection. Negative beliefs did. People who were anxious and focused on themselves, while also believing they were inadequate, performed poorly socially. But self-focus without the negative beliefs? Not a problem. So it's not about never thinking about yourself. It's about where your confidence sits. If you're self-focused because you're monitoring how you're coming across out of insecurity, that's repellent. If you're self-focused because you're engaged in something you care about, that's fine. The difference is needy self-focus versus secure self-focus. One repels, the other doesn't register, because you're not trying to take anything from people. Confidence itself is fascinating. Research shows it's more attractive than physical appearance in many contexts. A study in the International Journal of Cosmetic Science found that men wearing cologne were voted more attractive in photographs, even though the cologne couldn't be smelled. Why? The cologne boosted their confidence. That confidence changed their facial expressions, their posture, their energy, and people picked up on it. Another study found that being confident can be more important than being correct, using mathematical models. Researchers demonstrated how overconfident people could outperform realistic people in competitive scenarios because their confidence deterred others from competing. But there's a line. Overconfidence that tips into arrogance becomes unattractive. Research from the University of Queensland in Australia found that overconfident people were perceived as both more confident and more arrogant. Confidence attracted, arrogance repelled. The two fought each other. The sweet spot? Quiet confidence. Confidence without the need to prove it. That's the confidence that doesn't chase attention. It just exists. Humility plays into this. A study on attachment styles and psychological well-being published in a cross-sectional analysis from 2023 found that individuals with attachment styles characterized by the need for approval had lower psychological well-being. Need for approval. That's the engine driving attention-seeking. If you need approval, you'll chase it, and chasing it broadcasts your need, which makes you less attractive. People who don't need approval, they have stable self-worth. They know who they are regardless of what others think. That internal validation makes them magnetic because they're not trying to extract validation from you. There's no transaction, no hidden agenda, just presence. And presence, real presence, is so rare that it stands out like a lighthouse. Let's look at the paradox of attraction. You want someone to like you. What do? If you try too hard, you repel them. If you don't try at all, nothing happens. So what works? Trying without needing it to work. Being interested without being desperate. Showing up authentically without performing. This is the zone where magnetism lives, and it requires internal security. You can't fake it. People tried. There's an entire industry around playing hard to get, using scarcity tactics, mimicking confidence. And it all falls apart because humans have extremely sensitive detectors for inauthenticity. Your body language gives you away, your microexpressions, the timing of your responses. Research in behavioral psychology shows people make judgments about trustworthiness and attractiveness within milliseconds of seeing a face. You can't consciously control all the signals you're sending, but if you genuinely don't need something from someone, if you're genuinely secure, your signals align, and people feel it. Reactance theory explains part of this. Developed by Jack Brame in 1966, reactance theory states that when people feel their freedom of choice is threatened, they resist. They want the thing being restricted. This is why reverse psychology works. Tell someone they can't have something and suddenly they want it more. In dating, this manifests as the chase. If you're too available, too eager, you don't trigger any reactance. There's no challenge. But if you're genuinely busy, genuinely have standards, genuinely might walk away, that scarcity triggers reactance. But only if the other person is already interested. And here's the key. You're not manufacturing scarcity to manipulate. You're actually living a full life. The scarcity is real. You don't have unlimited time. You do have options. You could walk away. That authenticity is what makes it work. Manufactured scarcity without the substance underneath, people see through it instantly. A 2022 study on humility in dating found that people who viewed their partners as humble were more likely to forgive them. Humility mitigated the stress of long-distance relationships. Even college students, who you'd think would fall for flashy charm, showed good sense in appreciating humble people. The humble profiles got better ratings, more phone numbers, more dates, because humility signals long-term reliability. It signals someone who won't need constant ego feeding, someone who can admit mistakes, someone who values the relationship more than being right. And that's attractive for anyone looking for something real rather than something performative. Now contrast with histrionic personality disorder. The DSM-5-TR describes it as chronic attention-seeking and exaggerated emotional displays. Individuals feel undervalued when not in the spotlight. They need validation constantly, and it's lifelong. Why? The need is bottomless. The hole is psychological, formed when childhood attachment needs weren't met. The child learned the only way to get care was to perform, be dramatic, demand notice. That pattern calcifies into adulthood, and these individuals are exhausting, always on, always performing, never just being. That performance repels authentic connection because you can never reach the real person. They don't trust enough to show you. Maybe they don't know who they are underneath anymore. Security looks different. Secure people don't perform. They exist. They have nothing to prove. About 60% of adults classify as securely attached. They believe others will be there when needed. They're not anxious or avoidant. They're comfortable with intimacy and independence. close without losing themselves, alone without feeling abandoned. That balance is magnetic because it promises relationship without drama, without neediness, without games, just two people who choose to be together. No desperation, just choice. The link between likability and personality traits is clear. A study examining which traits make people liked found that traits associated with social desirability were correlated with being more liked by others, but more specifically, traits that were other-oriented in nature, aimed at interpersonal goals like maintaining friendships, were strongly related to liking. People like people who care about them. Shocking, right? But the key is genuine care, not transactional care, not I care about you, so you'll like me care. Genuine, I find you interesting and want to know you care. That kind of care doesn't chase attention. It gives attention, and giving is more attractive than taking, always. Positive affect plays a role. Research on Solomon's paradox, the phenomenon where people give better advice to others than to themselves, found that positive mood and self-transcendence mediated wise reasoning. When people felt positive and could transcend their own ego, they reasoned better, they connected better, they attracted better. Positive people are magnetic, not because they're fake, happy, because they've cultivated a mindset that sees possibility rather than threat. That mindset doesn't need constant external validation because it generates its own positivity internally. And when you meet someone like that, someone who radiates genuine warmth without needing anything from you, you want to be around them. Their energy lifts you up. And that value exchange, them making you feel better just by being near them, that's magnetic. Emotional intelligence matters. Studies show that emotionally intelligent people navigate social situations with ease. They're empathetic, understanding, responsive to others' feelings. They express their own emotions in healthy ways. Research suggests emotional intelligence is a key predictor of success in life and work. Some experts argue it's even more important than IQ. Charismatic people usually score high in emotional intelligence. They read the room. They adjust their approach. They know when to speak and when to listen. They make people feel seen and heard. And that skill, that attunement to others, doesn't come from chasing attention. It comes from paying attention to others, not obsessing over how you're being perceived, but observing how others are feeling and responding with empathy. That other focus is the opposite of attention seeking, and it's what makes someone genuinely magnetic. Here's a finding that flips expectations. Research from 2020, published in Behavioral Sciences, found that when participants experienced scarcity, they responded by amplifying their positive traits and downplaying their negative ones. This above-average effect served as a psychological buffer. In relationships, when people sensed the bond was at risk, they'd overemphasize their value to reassure themselves and their partners. Sounds like attention-seeking, but it's actually insecurity. Real security doesn't amplify. It doesn't downplay. It just is. Secure people don't need to convince you they're valuable. They know their value. If you see it, great. If you don't, they're fine. That acceptance of potential rejection is what makes them rejection-proof, because they're not betting their self-worth on your approval. Their self-worth is internal, stable, independent of your opinion. And that independence is incredibly attractive because it promises you could never control them. They're with you because they want to be, not because they need to be. Want is sexy, need is not. The scarcity mindset in dating creates problems. Research by Shaw and colleagues in 2012 demonstrated that inducing a scarcity mindset affected decision-making. People made poor in experimental conditions, focused more on immediate concerns, and made worse long-term choices. In dating, a scarcity mindset makes people settle for anyone available. They stay with partners who don't meet their needs out of fear they'll never find anyone else. They have a profound fear of rejection. They feel inadequate, and that feeling drives neediness, which repels the very people they're trying to attract. It's a vicious cycle. Scarcity mindset creates neediness, neediness creates rejection, rejection reinforces scarcity mindset. The way out? Abundance mindset. The belief that there are plenty of potential partners and opportunities for connection, not arrogance, just perspective. If this person isn't right, someone else will be. That belief removes desperation, and removing desperation removes the biggest barrier to attraction. Studies on social influence show that when people feel their autonomy is threatened, they resist. This is reactance again, but it applies to attention-seeking too. When someone needs your attention desperately, when they're performing for it, demanding it, that feels like a demand on your autonomy, you resist, you pull away. But when someone offers attention freely without needing anything back, that feels like a gift. Gifts create reciprocity. You want to give back, not because you're obligated, because it feels good. So people who give attention without needing it receive attention naturally, and people who need attention desperately and demand it repel attention. The irony is perfect. The thing you chase runs away, the thing you don't chase comes to you. Loss aversion explains this. Research shows people are more motivated to avoid loss than seek gains. Losing $50 hurts more than winning 50 feels good. When someone is scarce, might walk away, the potential loss creates urgency. But if someone is always available, always chasing, there's no loss to avoid. No urgency, no value. Scarcity creates value through loss aversion, but it has to be real. Real scarcity comes from genuinely having priorities. Your career, friends, hobbies, self-development. When you're living fully, you are scarce, authentically. And that scarcity makes you valuable, not as tactic, as reality. Research on personality disorders and attachment found that childhood neglect and trauma can lead to specific disorders, including antisocial, borderline, narcissistic, and passive-aggressive personality disorders. Borderline personality disorder is most consistently associated with childhood abuse and neglect. These individuals develop intense fear of abandonment. They engage in frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment. They have unstable relationships. They're impulsive. They have chronic feelings of emptiness. They need constant reassurance. And that need destroys relationships, because no amount of reassurance is enough. The abandonment fear is too deep. It's not logical. It's emotional, rooted in childhood wounds that never healed. So they chase attention desperately. They cling. They test. They push people away while simultaneously pulling them close, and most people can't handle that intensity. They leave, which confirms the fear of abandonment, which intensifies the clinging. It's tragic. But it illustrates the extreme end of what happens when you need attention. You destroy the thing you're trying to create. Connection requires trust. Trust requires security. Security requires internal validation. External validation can supplement, but never replace internal validation. That's the hard truth. Confident people, truly confident people, don't need to tell you they're confident. They show it through calm and chaos, through decisiveness without arrogance, through admitting mistakes without falling apart. Studies show confidence is attractive because it signals competence. Confidence implies you can handle challenges. You won't fall apart under pressure. But confidence isn't loud. Real confidence is often quiet. It doesn't announce itself because it's so secure it doesn't care if you notice. That indifference to your judgment is magnetic. You're drawn to figure out why they're so calm, so sure, so unbothered. And in trying to figure them out, you become interested. Interest is magnetic. Neediness is repellent. The line between them is security. Here's a study that matters. Research on charisma, published in 2025 by Andrew Housley, found that authenticity, active listening, and emotional intelligence lay the groundwork for magnetic presence. Positivity, storytelling, and confident body language enhance it. But the foundation is authenticity. Being real, present, genuine, not the loudest in the room, the most present, the most engaged. When you truly believe you're interesting, when you trust yourself, when you love yourself enough to not need everyone else to love you, that's when you attract, because you're not taking. You're giving. Your presence is a gift, not a demand, and people want to be around gifts. They avoid demands. The paradox is complete. Chase attention and you repel it. Don't chase attention and it comes to you, but only if the not chasing comes from genuine security, from a full life, from knowing who you are and being comfortable with that. You can't fake it. You can't manipulate your way into magnetism. You have to build it from the inside. Work on yourself, develop skills, pursue passions, build a life you're proud of. Create internal validation so strong that external validation becomes optional. Nice when it happens, but not necessary. That's the zone. That's where magnetism lives. In the space between wanting connection and needing it, in the balance between being interested and being desperate. In the security that says, I'm fine either way. The research is clear. Humility beats arrogance. Authenticity beats performance. Security beats neediness. Other focus beats self-focus. Giving beats taking, every single time, across cultures, across contexts, across centuries of human behavior. The people who don't chase attention, who don't need validation, who are comfortable in their own skin, they're the ones everyone wants to be around, because they make you feel good. They don't drain you. They don't demand from you. They don't perform for you. They just are. And that simple state of being yourself without apology or exaggeration, that's the most attractive thing a human can do, because it's rare, because it's real, because it promises that if they like you, it's actually you they like. Not a performance, not a mask. You. In Italy, in 2023, Researchers published findings on attachment styles and well-being. They studied young adults aged 18 to 30 and adults aged 32 to 62. Those with secure attachment styles, the ones characterized by confidence rather than neediness, scored higher in psychological well-being. The more someone displayed confidence in relationships, the better they felt overall. The more they displayed discomfort with closeness, need for approval, preoccupation with relationships. The worse they felt, simple correlation, security creates well-being, insecurity creates suffering, and people can sense that. They're drawn to well-being, repelled by suffering. Not because they're cruel, because suffering often manifests as neediness, as emotional vampirism, as someone who takes more than they give. And that imbalance is exhausting. Emotional labor explains part of why neediness repels. The concept, introduced by sociologist Arlie Hochschild in 1983, describes the process of managing emotions to fulfill the emotional requirements of a job or relationship. When you're around someone needy, you're performing constant emotional labor, reassuring them, validating them, managing their anxiety. It's work, and unlike paid work, you're not compensated, you're just depleted. Research shows that excessive emotional labor leads to burnout, resentment, and relationship dissolution. People who don't chase attention don't require this labor. They manage their own emotions. They self-soothe. They don't dump their anxiety onto you and expect you to fix it. That emotional self-sufficiency is attractive because it promises a relationship of equals, not a parent-child dynamic where you're constantly propping them up. Magnetic people give more than they take emotionally. They listen. They support. They offer perspective. But they don't collapse on you. They don't make their emotional regulation your responsibility. That balance, that reciprocity, is what makes relationships sustainable. And people instinctively seek sustainability. They want connections that energize rather than drain. And they find those connections with people who are secure enough to not need constant emotional maintenance. The contrast effect plays a role too. Psychological research demonstrates that we evaluate everything in context in comparison to what came before. If you meet someone desperate for attention right before meeting someone who isn't, the second person seems infinitely more attractive by contrast. This happens constantly in social settings, parties, networking events, dating apps. Someone performs, brags, interrupts, dominates. Then someone else speaks calmly, listens, asks thoughtful questions. The contrast is stark. The second person didn't do anything extraordinary. They were just normal. But against the backdrop of the attention seeker, normal looks exceptional. This is another reason why not chasing attention works. You're not competing in the loudness contest. You're playing a different game entirely. And by playing a different game, by being calm in the chaos, confident in the uncertainty, present in the distraction, you stand out through contrast. Everyone else is performing. You're just being, and being, authentic simple being, is so rare that it becomes remarkable. Research on compliments reveals interesting patterns. A study on positive versus negative attitudes published in the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology in 2022 found that sharing likes has a stronger potential to elicit liking than sharing dislikes. People who shared your likes were perceived as more likable than people who shared your dislikes. Why does this matter? Because attention seekers often bond through negativity, gossip, complaints, criticism of others. It feels like connection, but it's shallow. Magnetic people bond through positivity, shared enthusiasms, genuine appreciation, encouragement. They're comfortable praising others because they're not threatened by others. Success. They don't need to tear people down to feel elevated. That generosity of spirit, that ability to celebrate others, is magnetic because it signals abundance rather than scarcity. Scarcity mindset hoards validation. Abundance mindset shares it freely. And people gravitate toward abundance because it feels safe. You don't have to compete for scraps of approval. There's enough for everyone. Neuroimaging research adds hard data. Studies using functional MRI scans show that when people encounter scarcity messages, there's increased activity in brain regions associated with value assessment, emotional arousal, and decision urgency. The brain treats scarcity as a signal of high value. But manufactured scarcity, the kind created by playing games and withholding deliberately, creates cognitive dissonance. The brain detects the mismatch between the scarcity signal and the underlying desperation. It registers as manipulation, and the response is withdrawal. But authentic scarcity, someone genuinely busy with a full life, activates the value circuits without triggering the manipulation detectors. The brain accepts it as legitimate. You're valuable because you're actually in demand. Not performing demand, actually living it. That neural response is involuntary. people can't consciously override it, so you can't talk someone into finding you magnetic. Their brain has to reach that conclusion based on accurate signals. And the only way to send accurate signals is to actually be the thing you want to signal. Be valuable, be secure, be authentic. Then the signals align. The brain accepts them. Attraction follows. A 2023 study on scarcity and empathy published in Current Psychology found that scarcity mindset reduces empathic responses to others. Pain. When people feel scarce, lacking, deprived, they become less able to care about others. All their bandwidth goes to their own needs. This is why needy people struggle to connect. They're operating from scarcity, from lack, from not enough. That mindset consumes all available mental resources. They can't genuinely focus on you because they're too busy monitoring themselves, worrying about your opinion of them, calculating their next move, performing their next line. There's no bandwidth left for actual empathy, for actual presence. Magnetic people operate from abundance, from enough, from wholeness, that frees up bandwidth to actually see you, hear you, connect with you. They're not distracted by their own needs because their needs are already met internally. That presence, that full attention, is what creates the feeling of being seen, and being truly seen is one of the most powerful human experiences. It's what we're all searching for. Someone who actually sees us, not our performance, not our mask, us. And you can only be seen by someone who isn't blinded by their own need to be seen. That's why secure people create the deepest connections. They have the bandwidth for it. Here's where neuroscience enters the picture. Mirror neurons. Discovered by Italian researchers Giacomo Rizzolatti and his team at the University of Parma in the 1990s, mirror neurons fire both when we perform an action and when we observe someone else performing that action. They're the neurological basis for empathy. When you watch someone smile, your mirror neurons fire as if you're smiling. When someone radiates genuine calm and confidence, your brain mirrors that state. You feel calmer, more confident, just by being near them. This is why positive emotions are contagious. Research published on the neuroscience of charisma found that when people encounter genuinely positive individuals, their brains activate mirror neurons that create a sense of well-being. But here's the critical part. Mirror neurons detect authenticity. If someone is faking positivity, if they're performing confidence while feeling insecure, the mismatch shows up in micro-expressions, in body language, in vocal tone, and your mirror neurons pick up on that mismatch. You feel the dissonance, it registers as distrust, so you can't fake your way into being magnetic. Your internal state must match your external presentation. And the only way to achieve that alignment is to actually be secure, actually be confident, actually be at peace with who you are. Then your mirror neurons broadcast that state honestly, and other people's mirror neurons pick it up and mirror it back. That's the mechanism of emotional contagion. That's why being around magnetic people feels good. Your brain literally mirrors their state, and being around needy, desperate people feels draining. Your brain mirrors their anxiety, their insecurity, their need. You absorb it, and you instinctively withdraw to protect yourself. Social proof adds another layer. Robert Cialdini, professor of psychology and marketing at Arizona State University, identified 6 principles of persuasion in his research. One is social proof. We look to what others are doing to determine correct behavior. In the context of magnetism, this manifests as popularity breeding popularity. If other people find someone attractive, interesting, valuable, we're more likely to as well. Research from 2011 by Little, Caldwell, Jones, and De Bruin found that being associated with attractive people of the opposite sex makes you look more attractive to potential mates. This is mate choice copying. We use others' choices to guide our own. But here's the twist. Social proof only works if it appears organic. If someone is clearly manufacturing social proof, bragging about their connections, name-dropping, trying to associate themselves with high-status people, it backfires. People see through it. Real social proof comes from actually being valued by others. And you're valued by others when you provide value. When you're interesting, skilled, kind, authentic. When you make people's lives better just by being in them, that value can't be faked. It has to be built through actual character development, through becoming someone worth knowing. And people who don't chase attention are typically doing exactly that. Building themselves, developing skills, pursuing passions, creating value, not for applause, for its own sake. And that intrinsic motivation, that pursuit of excellence without need for external validation, that's what makes them valuable. The social proof follows naturally. People notice competence. They notice expertise. They notice someone who's genuinely good at something and doesn't need to brag about it. That quiet competence is magnetic because it's rare. The gain-loss theory of attraction, developed by Aronson and Linder in 1965, Found people whose esteem for us increases over time are more attractive than those who like us immediately. The gain feels earned. Immediate liking seems shallow, but growing to like you as they know you feels authentic, like they discovered your value. This has implications. If you chase approval from the first moment, you rob them of discovering you. But if you're comfortable with people taking time, comfortable with not everyone liking you immediately, the gain-loss effect works for you. People who discover your depth become more attracted than with immediate pursuit. The discovery feels like their choice. People value what they choose. Proximity matters, but not how you'd think. The propinquity effect, demonstrated by Festinger, Schachter, and back in 1950, showed people become friends with those nearby. MIT dormitory residents 1 door away had 41% likelihood of being close friends. 4 doors away, 10%. Physical proximity creates familiarity. Familiarity breeds liking, but don't chase people down. Put yourself in environments where the people you want to meet naturally exist. Show up consistently, not desperately, consistently. The mere exposure effect kicks in. Zayonk demonstrated repeated exposure increases liking. People who see you regularly, being authentic and valuable, grow to like you more. Without chasing, without performing, through consistent, genuine presence. The competence warmth framework shows people evaluate others on 2 dimensions, competence and warmth. High competence alone seems cold. High warmth alone seems weak, but both together, that's the sweet spot. Research shows people perceived as warm and competent are rated as more influential and likable. They feel safe to trust while inspiring respect. Magnetic people achieve this. They're skilled, but also approachable, kind, empathetic. They don't use competence to dominate. They use it to contribute, to help, to add value. That combination of strength and gentleness is irresistible because it's safe. You can admire them without fearing they'll use power against you. You can be vulnerable without worrying they'll take advantage. That safety is foundational for attraction, and it only comes from people who don't need to prove anything, who are secure enough in competence that they can afford to be warm. Final piece. A study on wise reasoning and self-transcendence found that when people could transcend their own ego, when they could get outside themselves and see the bigger picture, they made better decisions. They connected better with others. They showed more empathy. That self-transcendence, that ability to not make everything about you, is what separates magnetic people from attention seekers. Attention seekers are trapped in their own ego. Every interaction is about them, how they're perceived, whether they're liked, whether they're impressive. It's exhausting for them and everyone around them. Magnetic people transcend that. They're interested in the world, in others, in ideas, in experiences. They're present with you not because they need something from you, but because they find you genuinely interesting. And that shift, from self-focused to other-focused, from needing to giving, from performing to being, that's the shift that creates magnetism. It's not a trick. It's a fundamental reorientation of how you move through the world, and you can't fake it. You have to actually become it. Which means doing the internal work, healing childhood wounds, building self-worth, developing skills, creating a life that's full enough that you don't need any one person to complete you. That's hard. That's years of work. But the payoff is you become the person everyone wants to know. Not because you're trying to be, because you're genuinely worth knowing, and that inherent value that comes from being a whole, secure, authentic person, that's magnetic. That's what pulls people in, and it requires 0 effort to maintain because it's not an act. It's who you are. That's the difference. That's everything. A 2024 study published in the British Journal of Psychology examined how people rate attractiveness across different modalities: face, voice, body motion, and scent. The finding: no single channel dominates. What made someone attractive varied across individuals, but people rated as attractive based on voice were often rated as attractive based on appearance. The strongest associations were between face and voice. This shows attraction is about coherence. When someone is genuinely confident, it shows up in how they speak, move, carry themselves. It all aligns. When someone fakes confidence, the channels don't align. The voice might sound confident, but the body language is closed. Humans pick up on these misalignments instantly. We're wired to detect deception. So authentic magnetism shows up coherently. Every aspect broadcasts the same message. I'm secure. I'm authentic. I'm here because I want to be. And that coherent signal draws people in. You feel right? You feel safe. You feel real. And in a world full of performance and desperate attention seeking, real is magnetic. Real is rare. Real is what everyone is searching for. The irony is, you can't search for it externally. You have to build it internally. Then it radiates outward without effort. That's the mechanism. That's the truth. People who don't chase attention become magnetic, not through strategy, but through substance, through becoming whole enough that they don't need pieces of validation from everyone around them, through developing internal security so deep that external approval becomes irrelevant. And when you truly don't need it, when you're genuinely fine either way, that's when it comes. Not because you're playing games, because you're finally free. Free from the desperate cycle of seeking and never finding. Free to just be, and being authentic, unfiltered being is the most magnetic force in human interaction. It always has been, it always will be,